The video arrived at 2:17 a.m., 36 seconds that could ruin everything. Claire pressed play and watched a room of perfect smiles become a weapon aimed at her name. A single laugh, Evelyn's, cut through the grainy footage like a private verdict. Server logs whispered Marcus Bennett's initials back to a paymaster account. Outside, the city kept its quiet. Inside, a family secret detonated a $750 million deal. By morning, everyone would have an opinion. By dusk, someone would be forced to fall. Before we go any further, if this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us till the very end. And if the story moves you, drop your thoughts in the comments and share it with a friend. Now let's begin. Rain paints the city in slow silver strokes. Claire Bennett sits at her kitchen island with a single lamp on, the rest of the penthouse folded into shadow. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass, the skyline blinks like distant ships. Inside, the room smells of burnt coffee and lemon cleaner. On the counter, under a pool of warm light, lies a plain white envelope with no stamp and no name, only a single line written across it in ink that is slightly smudged. They laughed. I watch her without interrupting. She does not look like someone the world would laugh at. Her hands are steady, the knuckles pale against the paper. She opens the envelope as if it were a small, private rite, and inside there's nothing but a receipt from a restaurant she has never visited and a grainy photograph of a party room, people blurred, a circle of laughter frozen like a bruise. Her jaw tightens. She breathes, and the sound is small, private, a sound the city never hears. The room is clean like a photograph. Glass, brushed steel, the faint mathematics of minimalist furniture. A piano sits under a long painting, its black lacquered dull, with dust where she has not had time to play. Papers crowd one side of the island, contracts, annotated pages, a neat stack of something that looks important. A digital clock on the oven reads 5:13. Outside, the rain makes the glass look like a sheet of water tearing down the world. Inside, lights from other towers dot the distance like constellations. She is alone, but not lonely in the way people mean when they speak of loneliness. She is alone because no one in this building knows what keeps her awake. Claire moves with the economy of someone who learned early to make little gestures matter. She folds the photograph and slips it into the pocket of her coat. She is 30, but looks younger in the tired way of those who have stayed too many nights fighting to be believed. Her skin is warm brown, her hair pulled into a braid that ends in a stubborn curl on the back of her neck. She has her father's forehead, broad, resolute, and with it the weight of names and expectations that sit on the family like a carved sign. There is a meeting in 2 days. The board will meet. The press will be briefed. There are whispers of a merger, a deal stitched together by men who talk in numbers and see people as decimals. The envelope could be a prank. It could be a threat. It could be nothing. She knows how to live with not knowing. She builds armor out of work, out of facts, out of the small, exact pleasures of proving things. That is how she learned to survive in rooms that were not built for her. She pours coffee into a chipped mug and watches the steam make soft ghosts in the lamplight. The coffee is bitter, but it steadies her. She reads the stack of memos again, eyes tracing the same lines until the letters settle into new arrangements, small betrayals revealed in passive voice. The proposal is under review. The terms appear favorable. We anticipate unanimous support. People use language like a soft glove over a hard tool. She knows the glove hides the weight. When she was young, Claire listened to her father tell stories about how companies became empires, patient, slow, and then all at once. He told her that power had the smell of old paper and boiled coffee, that it thrived on loyalty and feared exposure. He used to say, "Never let anyone be the only story about you." She repeats that line now under her breath while dressing like a prayer. Her phone buzzes against the counter. A message from a number she recognizes as the PR firm. Prep materials attached. Client requests rehearsal tomorrow. Attached is a list of names, the other side of the room she is being asked to enter. The list reads like an economy of influence. Last names that carry towers and private jets, titles that sit smoothly on tongues. Next to one of them, someone has scribbled, sharp, smug. Claire smiles without humor. She knows what smug looks like. She has lived beside it. Outside, the rain slows to a patient drizzle. The city exhales the soft smell of wet tar and taxi fumes. Inside the penthouse, a clock ticks with polite accuracy. Claire takes a breath and notices the taste of iron at the back of her mouth. She moves to the window and presses her forehead to the glass. Her reflection looks back at her twice, once as the woman in the room, and once as a figure framed by a city that has not yet forgiven her for wanting. The light behind her cuts her silhouette into two, a private self and a public self. The photograph in her pocket weighs like something small and dangerous. There is a knock at the service door 2 floors below, a routine sound that somehow mounts like a metronome. She thinks absurdly of the ordinary people in this city who live in rooms lit by single bulbs and worry about bills and public transport. She thinks of how different the textures of stress are, the way a subway line snarls your pulse compared to how a ruined reputation can tighten your throat. The envelope is a bridge between those textures, and she crosses it with an even step. When she dresses, she chooses a dark dress with a collar that is neat and sharp. It is not armor, but it is deliberate. She tucks the photograph into the lining where it will not be seen. Claire is not naive. She can smell strategy like others smell cologne. She knows that tonight's silence can be tomorrow's headline, that laughter recorded in a photograph can be used as a weapon or as a truth. She has practiced the stares and the measured laughs, the calibrated pauses. On her kitchen wall, a small frame holds a picture of her father, Marcus Bennett, standing at a ribbon-cutting ceremony years ago, smiling like a man who once believed in simple causes. She pauses there, tracing the line of his smile with her eyes. The truth is a living thing between them, sometimes close, sometimes distant. The photograph on the counter is a promise of a future argument. She does not know the argument's shape, but she feels its edges. She locks the apartment door, and the sound is final. The hallway light is dim, the elevator hums like a secret. She steps into it, and as the city slides past the glass, she lets herself imagine 2 possible mornings. One where the board applauds and the deal signs without fuss, and one where laughter tilts into something else, where a single photograph changes the direction of a whole room. The elevator reaches the lobby. Rain beads along her shoulders. Claire straightens her collar and walks out into the night with a letter in her pocket that says nothing and everything at once. The phone vibrated like a small animal against the wood. Claire looked down and saw a message from an unknown number, a single link and 3 words, "Watch this, now." She almost ignored it. Strangers sense strange things. But the photograph in her coat had been an omen she could not shrug off. She clicked. The video was brief, grainy at first, shot from the shoulder of someone standing at the edge of a private room. For a beat, it was nothing but the ceiling, a smear of chandelier light and an oak beam, and then faces pushed into frame. Laughter filled the audio, bright and tight, the kind of loud that makes skin crawl, because it is practiced, not surprised. Claire saw Evelyn Harrington's profile first. High cheekbones, perfect teeth, the frozen grace of a woman who has always been admired. Beside her, Jonathan Harrington, older, the kind of man whose handshakes left a bruise, leaned back and laughed the way rich men laugh when an ordinary person becomes a joke. Then the words. Evelyn's voice, clear enough to slither into the room, said, "Look at her, the CEO's girl. She'll smile for cameras, but she's out of place." Jonathan barked the kind of laugh that absolved the words. Someone else, a softer voice, mimicked Claire's name in a way meant to make it small. The camera caught a wine glass lifted like a trophy, and the focus was on the circle of their mirth, a private crime made public. Claire's chest tightened until she felt like she could not breathe. The lamplight in the penthouse blurred. Her fingers fumbled on the screen, and the video stuttered, then ended. It lasted 36 seconds. 36 seconds that rearranged the geometry of her life. The phone buzzed again with another message, this one from her assistant, Mark. "We need to talk. Call now." Mark's voice came through breathless on the line, and then the words that snapped the room into a different shape. "There's chatter. It's online. Someone posted a clip. The Harrington name is all over it. The board is pinging. PR says prepare for fallout." His voice swallowed. Claire could feel something hard moving in her ribs. Not only fear, but a precise, icy accuracy. The photograph from the envelope was a puzzle piece sliding into the picture. She folded the phone into her palm and felt the weight of the unknown pressing there. Who filmed them? Why leak this now? The merger meeting was 2 days away. The $750 million proposal, the deal everyone said would change everything for Bennett Enterprises, was moments from being a headline. Now, a private room had become a detonator. She called her father before she did anything else. Marcus Bennett answered on the second ring, his voice a harbor, steady, close. "Claire." He asked nothing else, but she heard the question behind the name. She told him, and in the small human way, he was half comfort and half strategist. "Don't respond in anger," he said. "Let's see how it lands." He did not say he was afraid, he said facts. That was his armor. They were not the only ones who saw the clip. Within seconds, someone on the board shared it. The distribution was a quiet, efficient cruelty. Private messages, encrypted apps, a journalist with a loose conscience. The video traveled faster than any apology. The Harringtons, who had planned to sit at the center of the deal's announcement, were suddenly the story. Claire watched the reaction the way one studies a storm cloud's edge. Some messages were sharp and measured. This threatens reputational risk. Others were mercilessly practical. We need a decision. Withdraw. Her inbox filled with the hurried prose of people who had learned to make moral judgment feel like financial calculation. She felt a sudden sick clarity that in rooms like this, almost nothing is moral, everything is leverage. Outside, the rain tapped at the glass like a code. Inside, the apartment was an emergency of thought and breath. She felt betrayed, though she did not yet know by whom. Betrayal is a complex animal. Sometimes it bites with obvious teeth, sometimes with the covert chill of a rearranged truth. The video suggested something else. It hinted at a deliberate cruelty, not the careless snobbery of social clubs, but an intentional letting loose. It read like a line being drawn, and then, as if the universe were impatient, a new thread appeared in the messages, a logo at the edge of a screenshot, a tiny watermark that did not belong to any independent account. Claire paused a moment too long, and the observer in her noticed it like a seam in clothing. The watermark belonged to a company she recognized, a small media outfit used by some of Bennett's rivals for quiet intelligence. The name was one she had crossed paths with in boardrooms and late-night strategy sessions. A thought nudged her. Someone had not only recorded the laughter, they had curated it, packaged it for a certain audience. Her heart hit a different gear. The photograph, the envelope, the video, they were not random. They were a pattern. Someone had known the right time to press play. Claire called Eve Turner, a board member she trusted, and Eve's voice was thin with a different kind of fear. "If this goes public, investors will demand distance," Eve said. "They will call the company risky. They will call it toxic. People will not think about nuance." The implication lay in the static between the words. Nuance does not save money. A betrayal, then, did not have to be face-to-face. It could be a file on a server, a clip shared with an intent that felt cold and precise. The board could fold in minutes. Alliances in high-rise rooms are fragile things, and a single frame on a grainy video could be the lever. Claire imagined the possible architects of this act, like chess players in a different room, watching pieces move. Was it an internal rival who feared the merger's consequences, who wanted to sow discord? Was it someone in the Harrington orbit who intended to pressure their own family? Or was it the Harringtons themselves, setting a trap that would paint them as victims? Each possibility tasted like metal in Claire's mouth. She felt something else then, not only anger but the clarity of a plan forming. She could picture steps small and terrible. Call counsel, secure servers, set the record straight, find the origin. But underneath that, a quieter, more human knot. The knowledge that the world had been watching her as a symbol long before she became one. If the laughter in the video reduced her to a caricature, the deal would be a casualty and not only of money. Minutes stretched like taffy. Mark arrived in a blur, a man with a tired suit and a fresher panic in his eyes. He carried a printout and laid it on the counter. It was an excerpt from a private chat between two investors discussing the clip. One line stood out. "Pull out now. If we stay, we're endorsing this." Seconds later, another ping, a redemption of sorts, and a warning. Harrington PR denies. But perception is the market. The storm had a rhythm now. Clip, reaction, calculation. The $750 million commitment, the very thing Claire had spent months building toward, was now a fragile moth in a jar. The world, which rewarded certainty, was suddenly uncertain, and it moved with a speed that felt like violence. Claire folded her hands and felt the photograph in the lining of her dress like a small, burning coal. She had always known the cost of being visible. Tonight, she learned the price of being wanted by finance and hated by gossip at the same time. She put down her head for the briefest instant and prayed in the only language she knew. She cataloged the facts she could act on. Somewhere, in rooms she could not see, someone had decided to let light through a crack. The question that would not leave her was not simply who had filmed it, but who wanted it seen. The answer would alter more than a deal. It would reshape trust. And trust, once broken in certain rooms, is the currency that cannot be reissued. Claire sat in the small conference room off her office, the lamp thrown low so the screen of her laptop was the only bright thing in the room. Her fingers hovered above the keys and then fell back to rest. She could hear the buildings settle around her, a soft, familiar creak that meant nothing in the face of what was coming. "We need to control the narrative," she told Mark when he pushed the door open and shut behind him. His eyes were red at the rims, the kind of tired that meant someone had not been sleeping well. Mark set a stack of printouts on the table. "PR wants you to say the right thing," he said. "They want calm, measured. No blame." He watched her as if she might break at a word. He had been with her for 3 years, and he believed in her in the unreasoned way assistants do, loyalty mixed with quiet fear. "Eve's on the line," he added. "She says keep the board calm. Marcus is advising patience." Claire looked at the photographs again, the same grainy circle of laughter she had seen that night. She felt the anger like heat under skin. "People will accept their denials faster than they'll bother to learn the truth," she said softly. "They'll take the comfortable story over the messy one." Her voice was not loud, but it had the weight that made people listen. Across town, the Harringtons prepared a different performance. Evelyn paced in the marble foyer of the Harrington house, a silk shawl thrown over her shoulders though the room was warm. Jonathan sat on the edge of a chaise, thumbs steepled, watching the clock as if the world moved at his pulse. Their house smelled of citrus and old money, a scent that refused to be stained by scandal. "We deny everything," Jonathan said, voice soft but absolute. "We control the frame. We are victims of a smear." Evelyn touched his hand with a practiced tenderness, but her eyes were flat, cataloging risk like a ledger. Eve Turner, when she entered the room at Bennett Enterprises, carried an air of practical mercy. She had been on the board for years and knew the rules. Money first, reputation close behind. "We need to decide who sits where," she said without preamble. "Investors do not like messy stories." She met Claire's eyes, and there was a small, honest tremor in her expression. "I'm with you," she said, "but I also have to protect the company." Claire appreciated Eve for her clarity, not her warmth. There was affection between them, but it lived in margins, in emails, in late-night calls where strategy was their language. Claire thought of Marcus waiting at home, of the way his voice calmed like shorelines. He had taught her to measure risk with numbers and to keep emotion folded away. Yet The photograph had made something loose inside her. It had made her want to be seen as more than a symbol for a larger deal. Mark cleared his throat. "There's another thing," he said. "Someone traced the clip's first post to a private channel. It's not random. This was meant to get eyes on it." He glanced at Claire and then away, like he did not want to be the carrier of bad news. His hands betrayed him. They shook a little when he put a mug of coffee down. "Who benefits from this?" Claire asked. The question was simple, but dangerous. Mark swallowed. "There are theories," he said. "A rival investor, someone in Harrington's camp, or a third party looking to drive down stock." He paused, as if weighing which half-truth to give first. "There are also people who think this was leaked from an inside account." At the thought of an inside leak, something cold moved through Claire. She thought of the times she had trusted names in boardrooms, the half-smiles, the offhand offers of help. Trust in those rooms was a currency easily faked. Her mind slid to small things. An investor who lingered too long at a party, a consultant who asked uncomfortable questions. She had learned to keep people at the distance they deserved, but sometimes distance was not enough. Evelyn Harrington, behind her carefully constructed denials, had her own private fractures. She meant to be a matriarch, but she also wanted to be loved by a public that preferred victims who looked like them. Jonathan wanted influence, the slow burn of control that money offers. In private, they both feared being shown as petty and cruel. Yet their laughter in the clip had been real. Real things had a way of coming back to bite. In a small cafe 2 blocks from the Bennett offices, Daniel Price, a mid-level investor with a sharp tie and an even sharper eye, met with a reporter. He sipped his tea and watched the city through the window, as if deciding how much to care. "If the board does not act decisively," he said, "we pull." The reporter's pen paused. Daniel's calm voice carried the chill of someone who put profit ahead of people. Claire did not yet know Daniel, but she would learn his name in the hours that followed as someone who weighed her like a balance. Back in the conference room, Claire felt vulnerable and alive at once. She spoke without drama. "We can control how we respond," she said, "but we cannot control what people will believe." Her hands tightened around the rim of the mug until her knuckles showed. "If this is a trap," she added, thinking aloud, "then we need to find who baited it." Mark looked at her then with something like guilt. "There's one more thing," he said. He hesitated, and for a moment the air was thin enough to cut. I got a message last night from an old contact at Harrington Media. Someone asked if any of our internal files were sensitive." The confession fell into the room and landed harshly. Claire's face became a study of the way trust fractures. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, not angry in voice, but precise as a scalpel. Mark's eyes filled, and he said, "I thought it was nothing. I should have told you. I'm sorry." The apology was small. It did not repair the fact of the message. It only created a new layer of doubt, one that suggested the leak might not have been entirely external. The room felt different after that. Intimacy shifted into suspicion, and suspicion into a new kind of loneliness. Claire understood then that allies could be imperfect, that loyalty could hide fear, and that betrayal might not arrive with a dramatic flourish, but with a missed call, a private message, a look held too long. She folded her hands and vowed, quietly to herself, to follow the thread wherever it led, even if it came to someone she loved. Claire found the thread the way people find a loose stitch in a sweater, by accident and then with a horrible, careful focus. It was after midnight, the office stripped of its usual hum, only the refrigerator in the kitchenette making a small, lonely noise. She had asked IT to pull server logs and traces, to follow the video back to its source. She told them to be quiet about it. People move differently under the weight of secrets. She wanted to watch who changed their gait. The log was a thin column of text and timestamps. At first, it looked like any other list of digits and names, but then her eye snagged on a payment authorization buried in the metadata, MB Holdings. Claire's mouth went dry. MB, the shorthand Marcus used for his private ventures. She kept reading. There was an IP route that led away from the Harrington house, away from any obvious machine. and then into a shell server leased through a small paymaster company Marcus had used in the past for acquisitions nobody should ever see on a ledger. She felt the room tilt. The video, the envelope, the photograph, the cunning release that had unmade the quiet confidence of two families, all threaded back in the records to her father's network. Mark was at her shoulder like a shadow. "What is it?" he asked. He had been with her through late nights, through awkward investor dinners. He had been, until moments ago, the comfortable constant. She held the printout out like a paper barrier. MB Holdings paid for server time. "Look." Her voice was very small and very clear. Mark's face went a color that did not belong to him. He read, his fingers trembling as if the letters themselves were a live thing. "What if it's a front?" he said. "What if someone spoofed it?" He tried on the theory like a child tries a jacket that's too big. Claire wanted to believe him. She wanted every more comfortable lie. She called her father. The line clicked and Marcus Bennett's voice came as it always did, steady, weathered, the kind of sound that could hold a room. "Claire," he said. There was no fright there, only the sound of a man surprised that his daughter would call. "Did you authorize anything with Harrington Media?" she asked. The question landed like a stone into still water. Marcus inhaled. For a fraction of a second, she heard another man, not her father, but the strategist he had been in boardrooms. "I signed off on contingency measures," he said. "I thought it would pressure them privately, make them rethink their demands." He paused and then, softer, "I did not think it would leak." The confession came too cleanly. Claire's first reaction was disbelief, then a very hot disappointment. "You did this to them?" she whispered. You let them laugh at me to change a deal?" Marcus's silence stretched. "Sometimes you have to play dirty to win clean," he said, finally. This was a chess move. The words were a blade. Claire imagined him in a room full of maps and fanned-out contracts, moving pieces across a board while she sat at the table as the company's public face. He had taught her how to measure risk. He had not taught her that he might be the risk. Mark's earlier message about his contact at Harrington Media pushed itself forward like an ache. He had said he'd received an innocuous question. He had not told her the whole thing. As they spoke, Mark admitted he had forwarded an internal memo to someone he thought was a Harrington aide, thinking it was part of normal due diligence. He had not realized the account belonged to Simon Reed at Harrington Media until after the clip circulated. "Mark," Claire said, "the name brittle now, you send them files?" "I thought," he stopped, hands flat on the table. "I thought I was protecting us. I thought it was a private channel. I never meant for it to." His voice broke. The apology was real, but inadequate. Betrayal often arrives in layers. Marcus's orchestrated pressure, designed to control, had found life beyond his control. Mark's small mistake had been a hinge the other men used. The Harrington laughter looped in Claire's mind, and suddenly she could not tell whether she was angrier at the men who had joked or at the two people close to her who had made her a pawn. She went to her father's house the next morning under a low rain that tasted like metal. Marcus opened the door as if nothing had happened. In his office, surrounded by awards and framed headlines, he looked smaller than his suits made him. "Claire," he said. He kept his voice even, practiced. "You thought humiliating me in secret would help the company?" she asked. The sentence was simple, but it carried the weight of months of work and intimate trust folded up and tossed. "I thought controlling the narrative would prevent a messy public fight," Marcus answered. "If they think we can push back, they'll come to terms." He chose words like a man choosing tools. "I did what I thought was necessary." "You did it without telling me," she said. "You did it at the cost of my name." His face closed like a gate. "You need to separate yourself from your name," he said, cold now. "This company is bigger than any one person." The betrayal landed not as thunder, but as a steady rain that would not stop. Claire saw lines in the rooms she thought she knew, seems she had never noticed. The Harringtons were not only the enemy, they were also the forced victim in a game her father had started. Mark was both protector and traitor in one awkward human shape. In the hours that followed, Claire stopped being only frightened. She felt a deep, clean clarity. The twist of marble and money had revealed two truths. Alliances could be weapons, and the people she trusted could wield them. The path forward would not simply be rage. It would involve choosing whether to stay in a life arranged by others or to name the betrayal and pay a price she had never anticipated. She slid the photograph from her coat once more and looked at it in a room that suddenly felt larger and harsher. The laughter that had been a blow now felt like an ignition. Betrayal had been sewn into the fabric of her life by hands she loved. She would have to decide, quickly and alone, what to do with that knowledge. The city had learned to move around scandal like a river around a stone. It found new channels and kept going. Claire felt like the stone. Days collapsed into meetings and brief, bright shocks of media. The video lived in the margins of every feed, threaded through analysis and outrage. People who had never met her offered verdicts on her smile. Investors counted losses in the way weather counts thunder. The merger timetable, once a steady line on a chart, now jagged like lightning. She spent long hours in the office, the building's late-night lights, making the windows look like a constellation of private anxieties. Mark slept in the spare room on a couch he hated, and when she passed the kitchenette, she saw him curled in a suit, hands folded like someone praying. His loyalty had become a thin, frayed rope. She wanted to steady it and feared she could not. Calls came in that smelled of threat rather than curiosity. Daniel Price's voice was polite and close as a razor. "We need assurance," he said. "Either you distance yourselves or we reallocate." The sentence was business, but the meaning was personal. Pull the company out of the deal or lose capital. Claire felt the cold sweep of consequence. Without Daniel's money, the deal unraveled. Without the deal, months of work, and her team's future would be a ruin. Eve sat beside Claire in a small room, with a table their knees could not touch. "You know what investors want," she said. "They want certainty and a scapegoat. If you don't offer one, they will make one." Her fingers tapped an impatience that belonged to a woman who had learned to bargain with human lives as if they were projections in a spreadsheet. You could step back as CEO for a short time. Say, "You need to focus on internal review." Her face did not soften when she said it. She was offering a path that might save the company but break something in Claire. Claire heard the proposal like a needle. "Step aside. Make your name small so the company could be big." The words cut through a different place, not only a career, but a self. If she recused herself, the public would take it as an admission. People would read the silence as guilt. Her father's earlier confession replayed in her mind. Sometimes you have to play dirty to win clean. Who, then, would clean up the dirt? Marcus called with the tone of a man who had already decided. "For the business," he said, "you should consider stepping down for a time." He spoke with the steady voice that had ordered her childhood and her career. "It will let the market see the company can function independent of you." His insistence had a fatherly guise, but it also smelled like a bargain. Claire listened and felt a small, private thing in her chest fracture. "You set the trap," she said quietly. "You told someone to bait them." Marcus exhaled. "I did what I thought would secure your position, Claire. I misjudged our risk." His words were apology light, a measured thing that did not meet the blow it had helped strike. She sat with the taste of iron in her mouth, weighing loyalty to a man who had both guided and endangered her. There was legal jeopardy, too. If MB Holdings' link to the leak could be established publicly, investigators might ask questions about intent, about conspiracy. The company's counsel suggested a muted response. Deny knowledge, promise inquiry, hire a monitor. The law was a slow animal, PR was a fast one. The two moved at different speeds, and she had to live between them. Claire imagined the headline that could follow any choice. CEO steps aside amid scandal, CEO accuses father of sabotage, CEO fights to keep company intact while family collapses. Each headline was a splinter. Each choice required a surrender. At night, she would sit at her father's old piano and press keys until the notes matched some grief. The sound helped her map where fear lived in her body. Mark would come in quietly and watch as if hoping the music could stitch things together. "We can prove spoofing," he would say. "We can find a way to show MB was framed." The hope in his voice was small but fierce. There were moments of human clarity inside the dry calculus. Eve's hand found Claire's across the table once, brief and accidental, as if to anchor her. "Whatever you decide," she whispered, "do not let them decide for you." The words were simple, but heavy. They implied that decisions had emotional gravity beyond spreadsheets, that Claire's identity was not only a company line item. One night, a package arrived at the office. A plain manila envelope with no return, nothing but a single sheet folded inside. The note read, "Find Simon Reed's bank trail." The handwriting was crisp, not frantic. Whoever sent it had resources and intent. It told Claire clearly that the war was no longer just in public feeds and investor calls. It had legal maps and secret money. She recognized the danger. Following the trail might expose more than the leak. It might unmask motives that would cost people dearly. She thought of Mark's guilt, of her father's gamble, of the Harringtons' laughter, and of all the names that would be smeared if she tugged the thread. The deadline for the board vote crept forward like a legal dusk. Each day the options narrowed. Recuse, fight quietly, reveal the orchestrators, or abandon the deal. The choices were not moral. In any simple sense, they were trade-offs of ruin and repair. Claire's sleep became a thin thing, full of dreams where rooms split open like stage curtains and everyone peered through to judge. Internal pressure rose with a distinct physicality. Her chest tightened. She woke with stomachs of regret. Friends called less and with practical distance, as though their loyalty had its tradable moments. She was learning that power had a cost measured not only in money, but in what you would sacrifice of yourself. In the slow hours before dawn, Claire sat alone, the city quiet as a held breath. She touched the photograph she had kept like a talisman and felt its edges sharp against her palm. Betrayal had widened the horizon of her life, but it had also clarified a stubborn corner. She could be complicit in a cover-up, or she could name the truth and risk everything. The choice was no longer academic. It was a decision that would define what she thought of herself tomorrow. The boardroom smelled of lemon cleaner and old leather. Fluorescent lights hummed like distant insects. Around the long table, faces were pale and lined, hands nervy with the small animal gestures of people who knew they could lose money as easily as breath. Claire stood at the head of the table. Her palms were steady. Her heart was not. From inside Claire, everything narrowed. She could hear her own breath, as if it belonged to someone else. She remembered the photograph in her pocket, the laugh cut in grainy frames, her father's quiet voice saying the world required ugly choices. Now, those choices sat in the room like witnesses. Marcus was there, his suit buttoned just so, the press of age around his eyes. Mark sat a little behind Claire, cheeks hollowed for nights, on the couch. Eve's hands were folded, a small anchor. Evelyn Harrington's smile was practiced, Jonathan's jaw set like flint. Daniel Price watched with clinical patience. The projector blinked. Claire pushed a remote with a finger that did not tremble. The screen filled with lines of server logs, then a bank transfer, then a recorded voice, Marcus's voice, low and even discussing pressure and contingencies. The room folded inward on the sound. Marcus's face drained as if color had been leached from him. Outside the window, rain hit steel and glass in a steady thin applause. Inside, Claire's voice carried soft and sharp both. "I will tell the truth," she said. The sentence was small, but it rearranged the air. She moved through the facts like someone laying out bones. The server trace to MB Holdings, the message Mark had sent, the contact at Harrington Media, the bank movement. She did not shout. She did not point in accusation. She read, simply and plainly, until each line was its own small light. An impartial I would note how courage sometimes looks like calm math, evidence lined up like dominoes. The board sat like jurors watching an experiment. Some wanted to blink, some could not. Marcus tried then to explain. It was meant as leverage, not exposure. He said the words brittle. He reached for something that would smooth the fracture. But Claire held the room's truth between her hands. Mark stood when she finished. His voice came raw. "I forwarded a memo," he said. "I thought it was a private channel. I never meant to give them the clip. He looked at Claire, and in that look lay a child asking for forgiveness. The room's pity was not merciful, it was a calculation. Evelyn Harrington rose next, voice practiced, image rehearsed. "We denied knowledge," she said, "but the recording is damning." Her eyes flicked to Jonathan, who kept his face a mask. For a moment, the Harringtons' armor showed cracks, nerves like old cords fraying. That, too, had consequences. The laughter in the clip was not excused by their denial. It had been real, and reality cut both ways. From elsewhere in the room, Daniel Price's mouth curved into a thin line. "This house of cards," he said, "is unstable." He called for a vote to pause the merger until an independent investigation finished. Investors, he argued, needed the comfort of rule and paper and audits. He wanted cover, and his voice was all consequence. The board murmured and papers shifted. Money, when frightened, mutates into demand. Claire felt the weight of choice descend like weather. She could let market panic decide the company's fate in a single, brutal cut. She could accept the council's plan to issue a muted denial and hope the story went cold. Or she could do something harsher. She could make the cost of this manipulation real. She could expose Marcus fully, ask for an inquiry into MB Holdings, and place herself in the crossfire. She chose the harder honesty. "I will step down as CEO," she said, and the room inhaled. The sentence landed with the sound of a gavel, but only if the board also opens an independent investigation into the actions that led to this leak into MB Holdings and Harrington Media. If we want to rebuild trust, we cannot hide the rot. The words were bright and terrible. She met her father's eyes. "I will accept responsibility for my part and for the company. I will not be complicit in a cover-up." Marcus's face broke then, not entirely in anger, but in a kind of small, shocked grief. "Claire," he started, but the old, fatherly gravity did not carry him past the shock of public naming. Outside, a camera in the lobby caught the edge of the argument, then a hand moved to a phone. News would move fast now, it always did, but inside, something else was happening. The board was not a single thing, it was a crowd of wills. Votes were counted, legal counsel muttered options. Eve stood and backed Claire, a subtle but decisive turn. When the vote happened, it split like a river. A majority supported Claire's conditional offer. She would agree to immediate, temporary leave while an independent auditor investigated, but only if the board agreed to full transparency and action against any deliberate manipulation. Daniel Price, who had wanted certainty, accepted the compromise because it offered a guarded path forward. The Harringtons were furious and humiliated. Their denials could not erase the grain of the recording. Marcus sat down slowly, the sound of defeat in the little rustle of fabric. The final minutes were small and cinematic. Chairs scraped, a cup shattered in a hand gone too quick, a silence that tasted like iron. Claire packed a single folder, not her purse, not a last defiant letter, but papers that would help the auditor begin their work. Mark met her in the hallway. He said nothing for a long time, then put his hand over hers. "I am sorry," he said. "I will fix what I can." She walked out into the rain the city made for itself. Water dotted her eyelashes and her suit clung, cool and honest. The city's lights blurred into streaks of gold and white, like the long tally of choices people make. Claire felt the fatigue of a body that had held too much and the strange lightness of having named the thing that hurt her. A small, impartial truth. Truth does not always comfort. It sometimes breaks what is rotten so something else may grow. Claire's choice left a wound in her life and her father's, but it also gave the company something rarer than a quiet fix, the possibility of being rebuilt without hidden hands. Later, on a small stage in a conference room now buzzing with reporters, Claire would speak. She would say she had been flawed, that she had been failed by love and misjudgment, and that honesty was not simple forgiveness, but a starting point. People would applaud or not. Investors would breathe or not. The moral was not neat. For Claire, the ending was private. She had named betrayal and accepted a new kind of solitude. It was quiet, and it was honest, and in the chest where fear had once lived, something steadier began to grow. The knowledge that power, wielded without regard for people, always costs more than money. The weeks that followed moved with the precise slowness of things being unmade so they can be rebuilt. The independent auditors came with their folders and questions. They traced the bank wires and the server routes with a patience that felt forensic and fair. MB Holdings was named in the report. Marcus Bennett was questioned in public and private. He answered with the voice of a man who had always believed his choices were for the greater good. Sometimes his answers admitted mistakes. Sometimes they defended his strategy. The Harringtons faced consequences too. Their private jest became public fact, and their social power lost some of its polish. Investors stayed, left, or waited, each decision a private arithmetic. Claire watched much of it from the quieter rooms, a small office, a borrowed desk, phone calls that required only necessary words. She did not hide, but she was not the figure of every story. The board accepted the auditor's recommendations: clearer governance, stronger controls on outside influence, and a public commitment to transparency. They accepted Claire's conditional leave as well, a pause that read different in every headline and every conversation. For some, she had been humbled. For others, she was the brave one who would not cover wrongdoing. For Claire herself, the step down was less about image and more about listening. In the hush that followed the vote, she sat at the piano her father kept in the corner of the house and played the same 3 notes until they stopped feeling like a wound. Music, which never judged, gave her a place to think without decisions. In those quiet hours, she allowed the small, private griefs to arrive. The fact that a man she loved had used her as a lever, the fact that a loyal assistant had made a mistake that would haunt him, the knowledge that the world she had fought to enter would not let her enter on her own terms without cost. She spoke with Marcus fewer times than before, and when they spoke, the conversations were clean and careful. They were not the same parent and daughter who had walked into one another's rooms without knocking. There were apologies, murmured and public, and there were defenses. Marcus could not see every consequence of his actions the way she could. He had always looked at the sweep where she looked at the detail. He told her, in a moment that surprised both of them, that he had been wrong in his faith, that ends always justify means. It was not a grand confession. It was a small, human one. Claire felt a softness and a loss at once. Forgiveness, she discovered, was not a single act, but a long, slow project. Mark stayed. He did the work he could to repair what he had broken. He answered auditors' questions, tightened security, and learned to sit in rooms without the old fear that had made him slip. People made room for him because he had owned the mistake. That owning changed how others saw him and how he saw himself. There were no dramatic reconciliations, only the steady, practical work of re-earning trust. Evelyn and Jonathan Harrington retreated from the front pages. Their public apologies were a choreography of regret and deflection. The laughter that had started the whole spiral remained a raw thing for Claire, a proof that small cruelties have long tails. Yet, even with their fallibility exposed, neither villain nor saint emerged cleanly. People are complicated. Power does not strip them of all humanity when it strips them of privilege. The company moved forward under a new guard of checks and balances. The merger, once in doubt, was revisited under terms that prioritized clarity and accountability. Some investors balked, others leaned in because the company had made itself accountable. This was not a full return to where everyone had stood before the leak, but it was a map for how to rebuild with care. Claire did not go back to the CEO office right away. She spent time meeting with teams, listening to employees who feared their futures, hearing the small worries that never make news. Those conversations mattered as much as any press release. She learned that leadership could be quieter than command. It could be the work of watching and responding, of repairing the small things that let a large organization breathe. In one clear moment, walking through the building late in the evening, she paused by a window and watched the city reflect itself in rain-slick glass. An impartial voice, the one that had narrated some of the story's harsher facts, would say that power was messy and sometimes corrupting. The other voice, the one that sat in her chest and had learned to live with failure, said something softer. that people can change the rules if they name them, and that naming often requires cost. She thought about Marcus and Mark and the Harringtons and Daniel Price and Eve, each a part of the whole. She thought about the choices she had made. To tell truth rather than hide it, to accept a painful consequence rather than let the company rot in secret. She thought about the moments she had been proud and the moments she had been small. There was no tidy moral to hang on a nail. There was a lesson, though, that integrity can be expensive and that the price may be paid in private. Months later, when the auditor's final report was published and the board adopted its recommendations, Claire returned to a different sort of work. She did not return because the storm had cleared. She returned because she had decided that rebuilding was the better use of pain. It was not a triumphant return, but a deliberate one. She took small meetings, listened to complaints, changed policies, and learned to look for the quiet corners where harm begins. On a night much like the one where this had all begun, she sat alone at the piano again. The notes were not an answer, but a way to keep company with herself. In the soft dark, she realized that the true reckoning was not against others, but within, to hold to principles when it hurts, to speak when silence would cost more, to accept that love and error often live in the same house. The city outside blinked and moved on. Inside, Claire closed the piano and walked to the window. Rain traced the glass, and in the wet lights she saw her own face, older, steadier, marked by hard decisions. She drew a breath that was not quite relief and not quite victory. It was the steady, slow breath of someone who had been tested and decided to go on. So, tell me, if you were in his shoes, mocked and underestimated, would you have revealed your success or walked away in silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that flip the script on arrogance.